Most people treat investing like a race, and they spend their entire life sprinting toward a finish line they never clearly defined. More money in, every month, every paycheck, skip the vacation, skip the upgrade, pour every dollar back into the portfolio. Because that's what the book said, that's what the podcast said, that's what every financial influencer has been hammering for years. Save more, invest more, repeat. That three-step loop became the only gospel most people ever learned about building wealth. And here's the brutal irony hiding inside that advice. At some point, a very specific, calculable point, that advice stops being true. The engine you've been fueling for years, it quietly starts running on its own. Compounding takes the wheel without asking permission. And most people, heads down and grinding through the daily routine, never even notice the moment it happened to them. That's what this video is about, not motivation, not believe in yourself and compound interest will magically save you. This is about mechanics, about the exact moment the math flips and what that shift actually means for your financial life. About why the most powerful move in wealth building isn't adding more, it's recognizing when you no longer need to add anything. Here's a question nobody asks out loud. Why do you keep contributing to your investment account every single month? If you answer, because that's what you're supposed to do, fair enough. But let's go deeper than that default answer. You contribute because you believe, correctly in the early stages, that your money genuinely needs you to keep feeding it. Without your input, the portfolio goes nowhere. Without you feeding it consistently, the whole thing starves and stagnates. That belief is accurate, for a while. But there's a specific moment when the underlying equation begins to quietly shift. What shifts the equation is scale. No dramatic event, no windfall, no lottery, just slow, almost invisible accumulation over time. A number grows large enough that the market's percentage-based return starts outrunning your flat, steady annual deposit amount. Think about it in raw math terms. You have $20,000 invested, and the market returns 7%, standard long-run average. You get $1,400 from the market. Meanwhile, you're depositing $15,000 that same year. You did 91% of the work. Your portfolio did 9%. It's barely awake. You were still carrying almost everything alone. But something changes when that base grows. At $200,000, that same 7% return is $14,000. If you're still depositing $15,000, the split is now roughly 52% you, 48% the market. You've got a real coworker now. Keep going to $215,000 and the market's annual contribution mathematically matches yours. That's the crossover point. Not a milestone people throw parties for, no confetti drops. But from that point forward, you're no longer the primary driver anymore. The portfolio is. And the gap only widens from there. Every year, the machine grows stronger while your contribution stays flat. At $400,000, the market gives you $28,000 a year while you add only $15,000. You're the assistant now. At $700,000, you're contributing less than half of what compounding generates on its own without any help from you. And at $1 million, your deposit becomes an afterthought. The machine runs entirely without you. You are no longer necessary. The problem is nobody tells you to look for this moment. We're trained to focus on the input and completely ignore the output. Once the output starts exceeding the input, the entire strategy should shift, but almost no one recognizes when that moment arrives. Here's where most people get it wrong when they first hear about this concept. They go hunting for a magic number. So I need $300,000 and then I'm free? Not quite. That's not how the crossover actually works. The crossover point isn't a fixed dollar amount, it's a ratio, and it's deeply personal to your specific financial situation. It shifts based on two variables, how much you contribute annually and what returns your portfolio captures over time. If you're a high earner putting away $50,000 a year, the crossover happens much later in your journey. Compounding has a bigger gap to close. You need a larger base, maybe $700,000, maybe more, before returns eclipse deposits. But if you're contributing $8,000 a year, compounding reaches you faster. The math catches up sooner because your bar is lower. Even at $115,000, your annual return might already match or beat what you're actively adding each year. This creates a counterintuitive reality. Sometimes contributing less means compounding catches up to you earlier in your timeline. Not because you're building wealth faster, you're not, but because you're closing that contribution to return ratio gap much sooner. That's not a strategy recommendation, by the way, just a mechanical truth that's worth clearly understanding before moving forward. The implication is significant. You cannot borrow someone else's crossover number. Someone else's figure simply does not apply to you. The $300,000 you see circulated online is a reference point, not a universal rule carved in stone. Your number depends entirely on your saving rate. You have to run your own math with your own real numbers. Figure out when your portfolio's annual return, at whatever realistic growth rate you assume, will first exceed your annual contribution. That specific date is your crossover. Mark it on a calendar, write it down, make it real and concrete and visible, because your strategy before that date and your strategy after that date should look completely and deliberately different from each other. There's a planning concept that sounds reckless the first time you hear it, but the numbers make it increasingly hard to argue with. It's called coast fire. The core idea is simple. Accumulate enough capital early, and the math will do the rest without you. Let's say your retirement goal is $1.5 million by age 67, standard target for a comfortable retirement. Now here's the question most financial planners never think to ask. At what earlier age could you stop contributing entirely and still hit that goal powered purely by compounding, with zero additional dollars added from your paycheck ever again? The answer, for a 35-year-old with $175,000 already invested at 7% average annual return, right now. $175,000 growing at 7% for 32 years becomes approximately $1.5 million. Zero additional contributions needed. Done. Finished. The machine takes over completely. Game over, in the best possible way anyone could ever hope for. Does that mean you should stop contributing at 35? Not necessarily. The point isn't to stop adding money immediately. The point is to understand the threshold. Because once you've crossed it, the entire psychological experience of investing transforms completely. Before Coast Fire, every missed contribution feels like a step backward. Every market dip feels like a direct personal threat to your future. You need this to work because you are the primary driver. The pressure is real because the dependency is real and total. After Coast Fire, you're contributing with surplus, not survival. The baseline retirement number is already locked in and protected by math. You're running up the score now, not playing desperate catch-up. The game has fundamentally changed in your favor, without fanfare. That shift from necessity to abundance quietly changes every single financial decision you make from that point forward. The people who retire early aren't usually the ones who earn the most or had the highest salaries throughout their careers. They're the ones who hit their coast number fast through aggressive early saving and then trusted the math long enough to win. There's a phrase in aviation, pilot versus systems manager. Early commercial pilots flew everything manually, total control, total responsibility. But modern aircraft are largely automated. The pilot's job today isn't to fly, it's to manage the systems that fly. Wealth building follows the exact same arc. Your role doesn't stay constant. It evolves as the portfolio grows beneath you. In the early phase, you're flying manually. Every dollar you deposit is critical. A missed month has real immediate consequences. You're making real-time corrections constantly. A bad decision stings right away. You are not just the pilot, you are the entire system. Then compounding matures, and your role quietly changes. You're no longer piloting the plane, now you're managing the systems instead. Your job isn't to inject more fuel anymore, it's to make sure nothing goes catastrophically wrong along the way to your destination. Don't eject at the first sign of turbulence. Don't override the autopilot because a financial news headline suddenly scared you today. Don't make emotional inputs into a mechanical system that was designed specifically to operate without your constant interference and anxiety. This is harder than it sounds. For years, maybe decades, your identity was completely tied to the doing, the saving, the grinding. Your financial self-worth was measured in how much you could contribute that month. Sacrifice was the metric, input was the identity. And now the job is to stop doing, to trust the math, to deliberately stay out of the way of your own portfolio? For a lot of people, that psychological shift is more difficult than all the years of grinding and sacrificing ever actually were. We're not wired for stillness. Humans are action-biased by nature. When something feels threatening, the brain screams, "Do something now." Sell, pivot, move it, protect it. Every instinct you have fires at once, and almost every instinct leads you the wrong direction. Past the crossover point, the greatest wealth-destroying moves are almost always reactive ones made during moments of fear and market noise. The investor who pulls out during a downturn, locking in losses and then missing the inevitable recovery that follows shortly afterward. The person who chases last year's hot sector and rebalances into it right at the absolute peak of its inflated price cycle. The one who simply cannot tolerate watching a number go down on screen, even temporarily, and acts on that discomfort destructively. Your returns in the compounding phase aren't determined by how smart or clever your active moves are throughout the journey. They're determined almost entirely by how few catastrophic, panic-driven, emotional reactive moves you allow yourself to make. That's the real skill. Forget the big round numbers for a second. The milestones that actually change your trajectory aren't the dramatic, headline-worthy ones. They're the ones that mark a quiet but fundamental shift in leverage between you and the compounding machine working alongside you. The first time your portfolio gains more in a calendar year than you contributed, write that specific date down somewhere permanent. That's the crossover. That's the exact moment the math changed sides and the portfolio stopped depending entirely on you. The first time your annual investment return exceeds your monthly salary, that's a different feeling entirely. Everything looks different after that. You start looking at your paycheck differently, not as the only engine anymore, but as one of two engines now running simultaneously. And one of those engines doesn't require you to wake up early, commute, or perform for anyone. It runs through the night regardless. The first time a real market correction, 20%, 30% down, costs your portfolio more in paper losses than your entire annual income. This one feels sobering. It genuinely feels bad to watch those numbers fall, but it's actually a powerful sign of real scale. You're playing a much bigger game now. The swings feel violent precisely because the base beneath them has grown so significantly large. And finally, the milestone most people visualize, but very few ever define with actual clarity and precision for themselves personally. The point where your portfolio's annual return covers your annual living expenses completely. That moment has a specific name: optionality. That's not retirement, that's optionality. You could stop earning from labor entirely and the math would still work out in your favor. Whether you actually stop working or not becomes a lifestyle decision at that point, not a financial one. The pressure is permanently gone. These checkpoints aren't about celebrating with champagne. They're about recalibrating your entire strategy to match your new financial reality. Each milestone demands a completely different response from you. Early milestones reward aggression, later ones reward patience, restraint, and deliberate stillness. Here's a thought worth sitting with quietly for a moment before we wrap everything together into a final, clear picture. We live in a culture that celebrates effort, hustle, output, the grind. And in most areas of life, that framework is entirely correct. Consistent effort compounds into results. Work harder, get more. Show up longer, win bigger. That logic governs almost every domain we know. But investing reveals a strange and uncomfortable exception to that rule, one that took most successful investors years to fully accept. At a certain scale, the most productive thing you can do is produce less, interfere less, contribute less urgency to a system already working. Stop treating your portfolio like a project that constantly needs managing. Start treating it like a process that simply needs protecting from yourself. The highest return skill in long-term investing isn't stock picking. It isn't market timing. It isn't even diversification, though that certainly matters. It's inertia. The raw, disciplined ability to do absolutely nothing when everything inside you is screaming to do something immediate and decisive. Warren Buffett once said, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient directly to the patient investors who wait." What he didn't say, what takes years to fully internalize, is that patience isn't passive. It's an active choice made repeatedly against noise, against a constant, relentless stream of headlines, opinions, and fear telling you to act, pivot, sell, or protect yourself from imaginary threats. The people who build generational wealth aren't the ones who found the best stocks or timed the market with extraordinary precision. They're the ones who stayed in the game long enough for compounding to do exactly what it was always going to do, given sufficient time. Given time and the deliberate, repeated absence of panic. That combination, time plus restraint, is the actual formula. Nothing more complex than that. So, wherever you are right now, if you're early, your energy and your discipline are the product. Guard them both fiercely and intentionally. If you're approaching the crossover, start shifting your mindset now. The game is already changing even if the dashboard looks exactly the same. And if you're past it, if your money is already outpacing your contributions, then understand clearly the work isn't over. It just looks different. Your job now isn't to build the machine anymore. It's to not break the machine that's already running perfectly well without your constant input. And sometimes, after years of grinding, saving, sacrificing, and pushing, that turns out to be the hardest thing of all.